हाँ जी। हाँ हाँ। आज रहा है
वो कोई चक्कर नहीं, पता क्या
बंद करते।
I would like to start. Let's start with the national anthem. I would request everyone to please stand up in the respect for the national anthem. Good evening, everyone. Today, we are standing at the intersection of tradition and progress. Tradition, जो आप लोगों ने इतनी मेहनत से लेगेसी बिजनेस को बनाया है, and progress, जिसका एक बहुत बड़ा पिलर आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस है. आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस वो इंजन है जो आपके बिजनेस को ग्रोथ के लिए चाहिए. We have to realize in this era, in this age, this tool is something that is transforming and changing the definition of business, definition of all the dynamics. आपका जो business है वो business as usual से business as exception artificial intelligence की मदद से बन सकता है. With this, I welcome all the dignitaries. I request. I welcome dignitaries for the bouquet presentation. I welcome Mr. Rahul Dhawanji, who's the regional head of Yes Bank. Request our secretary, Shri Alok Suji, to present bouquet. We welcome Mr. Gautam Arora, Cluster Head of Yes Bank. Request Dr. Sukhpreet ji and Dr. Hitesh ji to present the bouquet. We welcome Mr. Ritwan, who is the eminent speaker on the topic today. And I request Sri A.D. Gandhi ji to please present the bouquet. Now, I would like to call Shri Ashavan ji for the welcome address.
नमस्कार. समीर, यही मैंने कहा था कि यहाँ खड़े होने से तो व्यू हरियाणा चैम्बर ऑफ कॉमर्स एंड इंडस्ट्री अंबाला चैप्टर की ओर से मुझे बहुत खुशी है आप सबका स्वागत करते हुए. हरियाणा चैम्बर ऑफ कॉमर्स एंड इंडस्ट्री अंबाला चैप्टर कई डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स में से एक डिस्ट्रिक्ट है जहाँ पर कि ये ऑर्गेनाइजेशन एग्जिस्ट करती है. और इसके माध्यम से हम एमएसएमई की प्रॉब्लम्स सरकार के साथ साझा कर उसकी सॉल्यूशंस ढूंढने की कोशिश करते हैं. हालांकि ये भी सही है कि कोई भी सॉल्यूशन ढूंढना सरकार के साथ इतना आसान नहीं होता, पर लगे तो रहना पड़ता ही है, और वो HCCI करता है। तो एक सरकार के साथ लाइजनिंग, और साथ ही साथ ऐसे टॉपिक्स पे डिस्कशंस करनी जो कि आज के समय के बिजनेस के लिए इम्पोर्टेंट, इन जनरल हमारी लाइफ के लिए जो टॉपिक्स इम्पोर्टेंट हैं, वो हरियाणा चैम्बर ऑफ कॉमर्स लगातार करता आ रहा है। और उसी सिलसिले में आज की ये मीटिंग है, जिसमें आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस, जिसका कि हर तरफ चर्चा है। अभी दिल्ली में बड़ी कॉन्फ्रेंस होके चुकी है, तरह तरह की बातें करी जाती हैं, जॉब्स ख़त्म हो जाएंगी। हाँ, फ़र्क पड़ेगा, क्योंकि इंडिया में सॉफ्टवेयर का ही फोकस ज़्यादा है, और ये आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस सबसे पहले सॉफ्टवेयर की जॉब्स पे ही अफेक्ट करेगी, तो फ़र्क तो पड़ेगा। पर ये सब जानने के लिए हमारे बीच में आज ये एक्सपर्ट मिस्टर रितवान जर्मनी से आए हुए थे इंडिया, तो हमने इनसे रिक्वेस्ट करी कि आप आके, हमारा छोटा सा शहर है लेकिन इस शहर में भी लोगों की जिज्ञासा है, आप हमें कुछ बताइए इसके बारे में। एंड वी आर ग्लैड कि उन्होंने हमारा इनविटेशन एक्सेप्ट किया और आज वो हमारे बीच में है। मैं कुछ लिख के लाया था। ये मीटिंग, इससे पहले जितनी मीटिंग्स थी हमने या फिनिक्स क्लब में करी, या वो नया यहाँ का 4 स्टार रामदा, या मैरीविल एक और नया खुला वहाँ करा, तो ये वाली इस हॉल में क्यों करी? इस हॉल के साथ ना बहुत पुरानी यादें जुड़ी हुई हैं। मैं आज सुबह आया था तो बाहर देख रहा था, 1969 में इसकी फाउंडेशन स्टोन रखी गई थी। श्री HK दास जी बिल्कुल सामने रहते हैं। उन्होंने अपनी पुत्री की याद में ये हॉल उस समय बनवाया था, और हम लोगों के, बहुत लोगों के घरों की शादियां यहीं पर हुई हैं। मुझे तो अपने घर का मालूम है, उस दिन आलोक कह रहे थे इनके बड़े भाई की शादी भी यहीं हुई थी, आलोक हमारे सेक्रेटरी, और भी कई लोगों से बात करी। तो दिस यूज्ड टू बी अ प्राइम लोकेशन किसी समय में। ये जब से ये मिनी सेक्रेटेरिएट बनना था, उठा के उन्होंने सेंट्रल लाइब्रेरी यहाँ शिफ्ट कर दी, इस हॉल में किताबें भर दी, और उसके बाद पिछले 6 साल से ये खंडर बनने की तरफ जा रहा था। तो अभी रोटरी से क्योंकि ये एसोसिएटेड है, और वो मानव बिल्कुल सही टाइम पे आए हैं, जरा हाथ हिला दो। मानव दास, HK दास जी के ग्रैंडसन, तो इनकी मदर आई हुई थी रोटरी के उस फंक्शन में। डिस्ट्रिक्ट के DG विजिट का फंक्शन था, मे बी 1 महीना पहले की बात है। उससे पहले भी कई बार हम, मानव और हम आपस में डिस्कस करते थे कि इस हॉल को वापस रिवाइव करा जाए। तो उस दिन मंजू भाभी इस दरवाजे के पास जब जा रही थी, तो मैंने कहा जी इसको वापस करना है, तो कहती तुम खुद तो अपने फंक्शन यहाँ करते नहीं, तो वापस कहाँ से होगा। तो उस दिन सोचा कि चलो कुछ करते हैं। हमने अपनी एग्जीक्यूटिव में बात करी। अब चेक्स जो साइनिंग है ना, वो ये आलोक जी करते हैं, और आलोक जी ने ऐसी गंदी शक्ल बनाई कि वहाँ तो इतना बुरा हाल है, ऐसा अनहाइजीनिक है। तो उसे देख के लगा कि अगर कर भी लिया तो पैसे तो नहीं मिलेंगे, बट एनीवे अश्विनी जी ने जिम्मा लिया। अश्विनी गोयल पिछले 1 हफ्ते से यहाँ पर खूब मेहनत से सारा कोर्टयार्ड बाहर साफ करा, पार्किंग जिससे ढंग से हो सके। ये पंखे सारे नए पेंट हुए हैं, बाहर वॉल्स को नया पेंट करा, पीछे बैकड्रॉप अभी ज़्यादा यूज़ नहीं करी, वो सारा नया पेंट करा। तो इसको, ये सब मैं इसलिए कह रहा हूँ कि ये करने का रीज़न सिर्फ एक है। मेरी तो बहुत यादें जुड़ी हुई हैं इस हॉल के साथ। बचपन में डॉक्टर जयदेव के साथ रोटरी की मीटिंग्स में आया करते थे। वो पीछे बालकनी जो है ना, वो अब यूज़ कभी नहीं होती, पर हम बच्चों ने वहाँ बालकनी से बैठ के बहुत सारे प्रोग्राम्स यहाँ देखे हैं। प्लेज होते थे यहाँ, संगीत के प्रोग्राम होते थे। मेधा पटकर को इस स्टेज से सुना, राजीव दीक्षित, वो जो कौन सा आज़ादी बचाओ आंदोलन, वो इस स्टेज से सुना है। वो सारी यादें जुड़ी हुई हैं। और फैक्ट ये है, पराशर साहब बैठे हैं सामने, अभी पराशर साहब ने 2 हफ्ते पहले एक बहुत अच्छा मुशायरा यहाँ पर कंडक्ट करा। तो अश्विनी जी ने इन्हें कहा कि बहुत अच्छा, कहते अंबाले में करने से पहले ना सबसे बड़ी दिक्कत आती है कि हॉल नहीं होता, हॉल ढूंढना पड़ता है। तो अश्विनी जी ने इन्हें कहा कि उसकी भी प्रॉब्लम हम सॉल्व करने जा रहे हैं। तो ये हॉल, जितनी बढ़िया एक्यूस्टिक्स इस हॉल की हैं, उतनी किसी और हॉल की नहीं है। तो ये थोड़ी सी मैं पिच इस हॉल की कर रहा था। बैक टू ये जो फंक्शन हमारा आज का, मुझे कहा गया था कि रितवान की कुछ इंट्रोडक्शन भी देनी है। रितवान की फैमिली से हमारा रिश्ता करीब 80 साल पुराना है। डॉक्टर जयदेव को हम में से कई लोग जानते हैं। बहुत छोटी उम्र में वो गुरुकुल कांगड़ी पढ़ने के लिए चले गए थे। अब वहाँ छोटा सा एक बनियों का बालक, जो पढ़ाई में तो बहुत होशियार था, पर वैसे सेहत के मामले में वैसा तकड़ा नहीं था। तो कई बार ऐसा हुआ कि जो सहपाठी थे, उन्होंने कहना है कि आज क्लास बंक करनी है, तो ये अड़ जाते थे, मैं तो बंक नहीं करूँगा, मैं तो जाऊँगा क्लास लगाने। तो वो थोड़ा सा डांट डपट भी करने लगते थे सहपाठी। तो ये रितवान के नाना जी उनके साथ वहाँ पढ़ते थे, घनिष्ठ मित्र थे, हट्टे कट्टे थे। ताऊ जी से मैंने ये सुना है बहुत बार कि वो 12 मील की दौड़ करते हुए गांगड़ी से लक्ष्मण झूले तक जाते थे, और लक्ष्मण झूले से गंगा में जंप मार के और फिर गंगा के बहाव के साथ गुरुकुल कांगड़ी तक वापस आ जाते थे। इस प्रकार का डील डॉल था उनका। तो डॉक्टर साहब बताया करते थे कि एक आधी बार तो ऐसा हुआ कि लड़कों ने घेर लिया और उन्हें किसी ने इन्फॉर्म कर दिया कि वो ऐसे जयदेव को घेर लिया है, तो दौड़े दौड़े आए और घुड़की ऐसी लगाई कि सारे तितर बितर हो गए। तो उस जमाने की रिलेशन है। आगे फिर हमारी फैमिली का पौंडीचेरी में औरबिंदो आश्रम के साथ बहुत संपर्क रहा है। बुआ जी वहाँ रहीं और इनके पेरेंट्स ने इनको बचपन से वहाँ आश्रम के स्कूल में एनरोल कर दिया, तो ये वहाँ पढ़े। तो वहाँ भी लगातार कांटेक्ट बना रहा। इनके मामा भी वहीं रहते हैं। इस प्रकार बहुत पुराना बिल्कुल परिवार वाला संबंध है। इसीलिए जब ये आए, इन्होंने अभी रिसेंटली एक किताब लिखी है और अवार्ड विनिंग बुक है, बेस्ट सेलिंग, और अब लोग इनको पैसे दे के बुलाते हैं, इनसे बात करने, पॉडकास्ट पे जाते हैं। सो वी आर लकी कि हमें तो फ्री में मिल गए। और तो बाकी तो इनसे सुनेंगे ये क्या कहते हैं। जैसा मैंने कहा, डर लग रहा था कि आलोक पैसे देंगे या नहीं, तो हमने सोचना शुरू करा क्या करें। तो यस बैंक में गौतम अरोड़ा जी से बात करी, वो कहते कोई नहीं, आलोक जी नहीं देंगे तो हम दे देंगे। तो गौतम, साथ में राहुल धवन जी उनके रीजनल हेड, और पूरी टीम यस बैंक की यहाँ पर है। तो वी आर थैंकफुल टू यस बैंक, जिस कारण से हम ये आज कर पा रहे हैं। और फाइनली वी आर थैंकफुल टू दिस फुल हाउस। हर बार इवेंट करने से पहले दुखी सी होती है, लोग आएंगे नहीं आएंगे। तो इतना भरा हॉल देखकर हमारा भी हौसला बढ़ता है कि ऐसी एक्टिविटीज़ लगातार करते रहें। थैंक यू वेरी मच।
I would like to welcome Mr. Ritwan for his presentation.
ये हॉल का मुझे पता नहीं था कि इतना पुराना है, तो एक तरह से सिंबॉलिक भी है, क्योंकि आज का टॉपिक लेगेसी बिजनेसेस पे है और ये दो पीढ़ियों से जुड़ा हुआ है अम्बाला सा। और इंट्रोडक्शन में मैं हमेशा भावुक हो जाता हूँ, क्योंकि काफ़ी फिल्मी कहानी है इसका, मतलब जो भी ये किस्से सुनने को मिलते हैं। और इसलिए बहुत खुशी है यहाँ आपसे बात करने को। तो मुझे आदत नहीं है हिंदी में प्रोफेशनल सेटिंग में प्रेजेंटेशन देने की, तो मैं ये अंग्रेज़ी में अगले 15-20 मिनट बोलूँगा, और फिर उसके बाद जो डिस्कशन होगा वो उसमें अपनी हिंदी स्किल्स दिखाऊँगा। तो और एक और चीज़ है, ये अगले 15 मिनट जैसे खाने के समय थाली पे मैं और मुझे पता है बहुत लोग करेला पहले खा लेते हैं, तो उस तरह से है। तो अगले 15 मिनट सेहत के लिए अच्छे हैं, ज़रूरी हैं, बाकी चीज़ों के लिए मज़ा बाद में आएगा, ठीक है। तो bear with me for 15 minutes. So there is a lot of excitement about AI, and I haven't created that excitement. There is a big movement around the world to create hype, and as Sangeet Paul Chaudhary argues in some of his writing, hype has a purpose. Hype helps bring capital, talent, and regulation, and a lot of resources together. So hype in itself has an economic utility. But the hype is useful for the people who benefit from that hype. Hype is not necessarily useful for you. And my goal is to frame the entire discussion around broadly what's called AI today from your perspective, from the perspective of traditional business owners. Because what you see out there is a narrative driven by vendors, by the people trying to sell you and all of us some kind of AI. And so with that in mind, let's just go through some concepts that I think will give you a lens to think about it more rigorously from your perspective, right? So let's just start by acknowledging what you have built is something that's genuinely hard, and that is great. Building a multi-generation business is not a joke. And whatever might be out there, right? The headlines in the news about all jobs will disappear and algorithms will take over everything. I mean, just on face value, that's nonsense. It's never in history has any technology kind of wiped out everything, right? And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that, but let's first acknowledge that, you know, we're neither going to go to paradise nor to hell. The reality is always going to be somewhere in between that spectrum. And it's important to look at what's going on out there in the world of AI, but in the world more broadly from your perspective, right? Don't look at the world from the vendor's perspective, because the vendor has a clear agenda. You need to be clear about what your goals are. So given that one starts by acknowledging there is no need to panic, there is no need to be fearful, and that what you've built is something that's genuinely hard and of value, the next step is acknowledging that what lies ahead is harder, right? So I don't have a message of, you know, we can all sit back and magic will happen. That's also not going to happen, unfortunately. But given these two things, then the good news is that you're better placed than you might be led to believe, right? Than vendors would want you to believe, because fear sells. There is nothing that sells more than fear. And the next best thing that helps you sell is excitement. And so again, we're back to this high spectrum where you're either, you know, the story is AI is going to take us to heaven or AI is going to take us to hell. And both serve the same purpose of creating excitement and fear. So you're involved in your sort of day-to-day business, and that's hard. You know, running a business is not something you can do part-time. And so what happens is the feed of information that comes through is via a range of sources that capture attention. And it all seems overwhelming because what you're seeing are the headlines. What you're seeing is also a narrative. And it's you know, it's good to state it, right? This is not happening on its own. The narrative is being built, and is being built by a whole bunch of actors, right? So not being conspiratorial here, it's not like, you know, there is one bad person trying to take over the universe. That would be simplistic, right? It's a lot more complex than that. But there is definitely a narrative out there, and acknowledging that is important, because only then can you take a step back and reflect on what's going on and what it means for you and how it affects you. So let's just take a step back to think with a much slower structural lens. Because the reason why you've taken the time, or we are all here for the next hour and a half before dinner, is so you can slow down, is so you can think more rigorously, is so you can ask questions, have a discussion about things that you've been mulling over. So I'm not going to tell you what you can go in tomorrow into your office and do, right? That's not the point of this. But let's take a step back, let's think through structurally from a first principles perspective about what is going on out there. So there won't be any simple answers. There won't be any binary responses. This is going to be a bit more nuanced. So before we even speak about a legacy business, let's just think about a system in general. And I tried to take something that's relatable for everyone. So this is the typical Indian city. I don't know specifically what city it is, and it doesn't matter, but it represents something emotionally, visually, that everyone can relate to. And if you speak with anyone, if you look at a city and you look at traffic, and you speak with anyone, what they will speak to you about is events. I was stuck in a traffic jam getting here. Or someone I know got late to work because they were stuck in a traffic jam. So traffic jams are events. So, you know, you can speak about those that have happened in the past. That's not going to change anything in the future. And if you fix them in the present, you're not solving the root cause. You're just reacting to what's going on. And now if we draw a parallel to the AI narrative, all I have been seeing for the last few years, especially in the context of LLMs, or what you would know in the form of, you know, ChatGPT and Gemini and whatever they're all called, is about events. This new model got released. This new thing was done. And so when you are in this traffic of stuck in this, with traffic jams being created, with things being blocked, unblocked. It's a lot of noise that doesn't allow you to think deeper. And if you want to act on something, there is no point trying to act on a traffic jam, because if you solve it now, it'll come back tomorrow because the cause is deeper. And so it's important to go a little deeper beyond events and to think about structures. And so let's just say two aspects, right? One physical, right? The road itself. We can all see that. That's the most obvious thing. And so if you see something like this and I ask you, what do we do about it? You might say, oh, let's just make a wider road, right? Let's add a second road. Let's add more lanes. And this is something I actually observed over the last decade and a half, is that roads have been getting wider. The traffic has now been getting better. And so then comes the question, is traffic just about the physical infrastructure in the roads, or is there an underlying logic that causes traffic to get blocked, right? And those are the rules of traffic. And then comes the question, is the intervention physical necessarily? Because physical is obvious. Physical is a line on your balance sheet, right? It's something very concrete. While the underlying rules that drive, that cause those traffic jams are not necessarily, you can't grasp them. But when you see free-flowing traffic somewhere, then you realize that it can also flow well, right? It does not have to all get jammed. And so thinking in terms of structure and modules is something we'll do in the next few minutes. Because when you think of structure, right, you're acting at a higher point of leverage. So if you think of Archimedes, right? So the more leverage you have in your actions, the more you can get done with less resources, right? That's the goal. So after structure, right, then comes the question, what is the point of this, right? So was this city built for cars, or was it built for people, right? Is this city older than automobiles? Perhaps the cars came later. And so, all these traffic problems are arising from the fact that this city wasn't even built for cars. And it's interesting because you see that in footfall numbers, right? So there are a lot of old districts where you can't go by car, but they still have 7 times the footfall of modern designed commercial, malls. So then comes again the question, also then, when you look at your business, what is our goal, right? Do we just want to produce manufacture a certain product, or do we want to do something else? And even deeper is the idea of a paradigm. And a paradigm is the overall mindset, the things that you consider to be something to aspire to. So everything that shapes what you do, right? The paradigm is what you're operating in. And then you can ask yourself the question, if you just take a step back from the current traffic jam on the image and say, is the city built or does it grow, right? If you say, I want to add more roads and widen it, then the underlying paradigm is that cities are built, that you can influence, control, and make a city evolve the way you want, right? While if you say, let's focus perhaps on traffic flow, right? Let's focus on the intangibles, then you might be working from a paradigm with the underlying assumptions that a city cannot be built, that a city grows on its own, right? That there are mechanisms that you don't control. Same city, same traffic, 2 different points of view. And there is no right and wrong, right? They're just 2 different points of view, and case by case, situation by situation, you have to ask yourself the question, what makes more sense, right? And sometimes you just have to experiment. So you try one, and if it doesn't work, you try the other. So before we speak about AI, let's just speak about what any form of AI out there uses, and that is data. And before the excitement around AI, there was a narrative around data, that data is some kind of oil, right? You would have heard this 10 years ago, data is the new oil, right? As if it's some kind of raw material, right, that you just need to process and store. And if you do that, just like oil, like a commodity, you will create value. That's of course nonsense, because in no other field, right, is data some kind of fuel. Data in every domain is about abstraction, right, about understanding structure. It's about causality. It's about understanding what causes something to happen. It's about learning. It's about seeing patterns, right? And it's about instrumentation. It's about control. How do I get something done? So data is never oil, right? Data is not a raw material that you need to collect, that you need to process, because data by itself is meaningless. It only has a meaning when it is used to learn structure, causality, etc., instrumentation, etc., about a system. And so that brings us to this idea that at the end of the day, in the most abstract way possible, your business is a system for value creation. So we're really thinking from first principles here together. We're building some foundations, and then when you go home, you can think, you can mull over it about your business specifically, right? But having a first principles systems thinking approach helps get a better sense, because it's away from the day-to-day grind of firefighting, solving this thing that broke and something else. So if a business is a system of value creation, then as we have seen, every system has a paradigm, right? Is a city built or does a city grow? The same thing for your business, right? There is some underlying set of assumptions. There is a certain worldview, a certain mindset that drives the decisions you make every day, that drives the investments you make every day, right? And so let's talk about that. So now that we said every business is a system for value creation, right, and that every system has a paradigm, then the next thing to keep in mind is that every paradigm has constraints. There are things that you can't do in that paradigm, right? And that a system has a goal that you're trying to solve. Otherwise, why would you even do anything, right? And so usually you have some kind of constraint, either articulated or not, and the goal is to try to solve for that constraint. So let's make it more concrete, okay? This was the most bitter part of the Karela. Now let's make it, now let's start tasting this stuff. So there are three core paradigms I want to present to you. The first one is the industrial paradigm. I think most legacy businesses were born in this paradigm. Most businesses operate in this paradigm. So what is the core constraint? The industrial paradigm has constant marginal costs of replication, meaning if I produce one bottle, I want to produce the next one. Once I have set up my factory or whatever, right, producing the next one requires more or less the same amount of raw materials, more or less the same amount of energy and labor and whatever else. And so the core constraint I'm trying to solve is how can I produce something, how can I produce a lot of something? Given that I have one thing, how can I make more of it? And the goal here obviously is efficiency, right? So you want to minimize this marginal cost of production, right, while matching demand. You don't want to overproduce either. And if we go back historically, the big constraint always was scarcity. For all of human history, we were very often short of food. We were short of clothing. We were short of a whole bunch of things. It's only really after broadly the Second World War that enough people around the world had access to these things. And so until the 1960s, 70s, the whole goal was let's just produce as much as we can. It's only then that some forms of saturation started emerging for some types of products or for certain markets. So just to draw a parallel, Henry Ford's idea of manufacturing at scale and mass producing, and the Toyota system saying, look, we're Japan, we're a smaller island, we need to be more flexible. We cannot just produce as many cars as we want, because yes, they might be cheap, but if there's no one to buy the cars, there's no point producing it. We need to be able to adapt to demand. And the engine of value here is the process. And this is something that's very important, because when you start building a business, it's a lot of skill and craftsmanship and a lot of knowledge in the minds of the people who are starting and building it. But for it to scale and for it to last, and especially the multi-generational theme, that's, I think, very important for any industrial region, whether here in Ambala or in Germany or anywhere around the world where the high-end manufacturing happens, is that you have to find a way to systematize knowledge such that you're not working on the product, you're working on a process, and the process has the product as an outcome. The next paradigm, and this is very much driven by technology from the 1990s or so, is the digital paradigm. What happens here is the constraint changes completely, right? So once I created this PDF of these slides, right, If we were in the industrial paradigm, I would be printing them out and handing them to each of you, right? Before we had this technology, that's how you would do meetings. You would print the notes, you would give everyone a copy, and so you have constant marginal costs of replication. Every time I print the notes, the paper costs me, the ink costs me something, etc. The moment I go to the digital paradigm, I can forward this to all of you, right? On an instant messaging app, by email, it costs me nothing. And so this is a fundamental shift in the paradigm of how you create value for your customer. And so because the constraint has changed, there is a new constraint. And that new constraint is, is someone ever going to read what I'm writing? Is someone going to watch the video I'm making? Is someone going to use the software I'm building, right? So the constraint changes. And so the way value is created, right, and the goal changes with that constraint. So now the goal is no longer how can I produce as many PDFs, video files, whatever in the software in the cheapest way possible. The constraint becomes how do I build something that someone wants? And that brings us to the engine of value in the digital paradigm, which is no longer a process, because the way you build something does not matter that much. What matters is, are you solving someone's problem? Is someone going to use it to achieve a certain outcome following a certain set of steps? And that's called a use case. So person X trying to achieve goal Y following steps Z, right? So you move from, this is a process, this is an abstraction of how I'm creating value with my product, to how do I help someone get from point A to point B following something? And then there's a third paradigm. And again, I said it's the digital paradigm does not mean it's constrained to digital technology. The core idea in the digital paradigm was learning, right? In the platform paradigm, the constraint changes. So now the goal is no longer that you produce something for someone. Your job is to bring things and people together, right? The most familiar thing would be if you used a ride-hailing app to get here. Ola, Uber, whatever, right? They're not driving the car. They're not, they are not the passenger themselves. They're just matching people. And so in this paradigm, the goal is no longer to produce something cheaply. It's no longer to produce something for someone. It's more about establishing trust and governance and allowing interactions to happen. And I was speaking with Ashwiniji yesterday, and he spoke about a trade fair that happened in Ambala and the value it created. That's a very nice example. It's in fact a tech agnostic example, because what a trade fair does is it establishes norms and governance under which transactions, interactions can happen. So value is being created without anyone explicitly creating it. In fact, the goal of the operator is just to enable these value generating interactions. And so these are three distinct paradigms, right? I mean, none of these is sort of comparable or a version of the other. They have three very different ones. And so the question I ask you to take home is, are you operating in only one paradigm today? Because there are three paradigms, as we just looked at. And there is no reason to constrain yourself to one paradigm, because when the manufacturing business was started, let's say 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, 100 years ago sometimes, because I found out that I think the oldest factory here was set up in the 1800s. There was no digital technology then, right? So the point of the business as a system was to solve for a certain constraint. Right now there's a new set of constraints and paradigms that have emerged, and there is no reason to hold back, right? You can play a more multi-dimensional game. You're not constrained to a single dimension. And before one jumps in and says, okay, let's do all three, right? So let's do industrial digital platform right now. It's important to keep in mind that there's a reason why these are three different paradigms, is because they are fundamentally different and cannot be just mixed and merged, right? So the goal in the industrial one, right, is you want to control quality. So you want to control processes to ensure quality, right? So it's a paradigm that is about standardization, about control, and about reducing variation, right? If you keep changing your process, what you produce will be trash, right? If you think of the digital paradigm, right, the goal on the digital paradigm is to increase variation. So if you're selling educational equipment around India, you want to try to change your digital product, whether it's content or software or app, whatever you're building, you want to try a different one in Tamil Nadu. You want to see what they use. You want to try a different one for Maharashtra. You want to see what they use, what they get value from. And they will be different, right? That's the point. And the cost of replication is zero, meaning once you find sort of a common average that brings value to a school in West Bengal, you just have to do it once, and then the entire state can use it, right? So it's a paradigm of discovery through learning, through experimentation, and shaped by users. So the goal is no longer how do I produce in my factory, it's much more how do I create value for my user. And the goal in the platform paradigm is that you are not really doing any of these directly. As an operator, you're just co-creating, you're enabling interactions. And you can't force these. You have to build trust and establish these. And the important thing is, from a systems perspective, these three are all mutually incompatible at first glance. There is no obvious way to just mix these, right? So this is not something that you can do in a flippant way, aise kal ut ke chalo kar lenge. That's not going to work. It's a lot more complex than that. And no naive mix is possible, right? Because there is a clear incompatibility. You can pick any two of these and you will find that they're structurally incompatible. That does not mean that you cannot combine them. It just means you can't combine them in a naive way. And the engine of value is very different, right? So the process is about something you control in your factory. The use case is about your customer or the user of the product. And the interaction is not you interacting with someone, but it's two people where you're enabling the interaction. So these are three very fundamentally different engines of value. Each of these compound, right? So the important thing is you can make each of these compound with their own logic, in their own way. And now to start wrapping it up, once we looked at three paradigms, let me put 5 value functions to you. So the first one I think is something that everyone will relate to, which is production. So you're transforming some lower value inputs into a higher value output, right? That's, in the most general sense, that's how you create value as a manufacturing business. And so what happens here is as you improve your process, if your process improves by X%, it's not just improved for that one lot or that one unit you produce, it's improved for everything in the future. And so the compounding logic comes from improving the process, right? So every improvement has not an incremental increase in value, it has a multiplicative improvement in value. But at some point it flattens out because there are physical constraints. There are, from a pure physics perspective, there is, beyond a certain point, there is not a lot you can extract from this. So, if this is, ये अगर एक नींबू है तो आप कितना निचोड़ोगे? एक हद तक, फिर उसके बाद कड़वा हो जाता है और कुछ है नहीं उसमें, right? And what that means is, what are the other, right? What are the other vectors along which you can create value? So the other one is allocation. So if you're a production business, this is what your distributor is doing right now, right? So they are moving goods or information, right, from somewhere where they are valued less to somewhere where they are valued more, right? That's that information arbitrage that they're playing, right, or a physical arbitrage. And there is no reason for you not to play in this field, right? So the constraint earlier was in Ambala, you cannot sort of be connected with a customer, with a user in Karnataka. You cannot be connected with a user in Assam. It's just too far. It would be too expensive. In the digital paradigm, suddenly that goes away, right? Because now you can connect with them, you can interact with them, you can deliver value to them, right, in a way that costs you, only one-time setup costs. And so now a new dimension has opened along which you can think about delivering value to your customer as let's say, a traditional legacy manufacturing business. And again, you have a compounding logic here. The more, the better you understand the playing field, right? So where is a certain product or a certain information more valuable, the better you can play this game. The third one is access, right? So when we looked at production, when you produce something and you sell it, that's the end of the game. You don't know what's happening with that, right? in the access game, you retain ownership. So you're providing a certain outcome. You say, look, I manufacture microscopes, but I don't sell the microscope to you. I operate the lab for you, right? So you pay me to operate a full-fledged lab, let's say. Now you learn things like, okay, how long do individual items in the lab last? What needs most maintenance, right? What breaks fast, etc. And that can feed back into your R&D, that can feed back into prioritizing what products you need to improve on. That feeds back into deciding how much you need to produce of something, at what point in the year, etc. The underlying thing, obviously, is that it's spitting out a whole load of data. So if you say, I want to use AI in my business, and you're a pure play production business along one value line, and you're missing out on all the other dimensions, there's not that much you can, it's just one lemon you can squeeze, while with access, you have a whole new dimension along which you can create value. And then there's contracted delivery. So so if production is about standardized, transformation of inputs into outputs, this is much more custom, right? This is the very premium, the R&D part, the stuff where you make something specific to some kind of terms that you have negotiated with your customer. And finally, there's risk pooling. There are just some things that you cannot do on your own, right? You have to, because that's this idea from probability theory, which is the law of large numbers. So either you're doing something very frequently, or in a more general sense, if you can aggregate risk across a bunch of people, right? So now if you say, I make microscopes, but if I want, instead of just trying to make microscopes, let me work with people who make different lab equipments that are complementary, and let's provide that together in a way where we get paid for access, right? So now you can start playing by combining multiple value functions, and you're playing a game which is much richer and which throws up a lot more data, because like we said, if you're just doing production, there's just one kind of data that you can really sort of use to compound value. And so the question I ask you to take home is, are you operating in only one value function today, right? Are you just a production company? Are you just a distribution company, right? Can you do more? Because the more you do, the bigger your playing field, right? So what if you added just one more value function? Don't try to do all five, right? Like I said with the paradigms, this is not easy. This is hard, but it's worthwhile. And it's something, more importantly, it's something that is risk-free in the sense that it's clear, logical, and you see that if you act on this, you will create value, right? It won't be like we saw in the AI summit, right, with Galgotias. You're not just buying a dog robot, putting your name on it, and then saying, oh, look, we're doing amazing stuff, right? This stuff is solid. And that's why it's hard, because the stuff that seems easy is obviously nonsense. So the reason why I tortured you through 3 paradigms and 5 value functions is that AI is most powerful inside a feedback loop. Unless you're generating data that you can then use to drive any form of AI, you will not be able to compound value, right? So a production-only business has one loop, which is your factory floor. So you're structurally constrained. And so you might have a vendor or consultant trying to pitch you something, but always know that that's the limit. You can't go beyond that. So how about you add allocation, right? So let's assume you're a production business, how about you add allocation and you close a second loop, right? So now you're learning along a completely new axis. You're creating value along a completely new axis. Or you could add access, right? So you continue owning the equipment, product, whatever you make, and you provide access to your customer. Or you could do contracted delivery. So if you're making something that's not very high value, that's not very premium today, you could start going into more custom stuff. And there is no easy answer. I cannot just say, oh, do this, right? It really, you have to, the most important thing is that you have to think for yourself from first principles. And the answer is going to be different for everyone. And that's good, because in a competitive market, if there was one answer that everyone followed, that advantage gets competed away. So each feedback loop brings proprietary data. Proprietary meaning you own it. It's your data, it's your business. And as long as you leverage, right, your assets, which is, let's say, your existing factory or your existing distribution relationships or whatever. So you want to leverage what you already have, right? We are in a legacy hall. Everyone here works or owns legacy businesses. And so you want to use that legacy. That's your strength. That's something that's your asymmetric advantage. You have it, and a startup doesn't. Right? They can build a digital portal from scratch. Right? They can build an e-shop from scratch and try to sell online, but they don't have the factory to produce the stuff. You already have that. And so the most impactful second function that you can add to production is not simply about incremental value. It's not saying, oh, I'm doing this, we'll just add, one more thing to it. It's that now you are compounding on two different axes, right? So now you move from a one-dimensional business to a two-dimensional business, and you're compounding not just along one axis, you're compounding in this entire space. And if you add a third dimension, right, you're operating in a three-dimensional space, broadly in terms of value. And so that is why this stuff is fascinating, because it makes you more viable, it makes you more competitive, and it makes you more robust. And the intergenerational question is, your kids have probably seen you grind at your production and industrial business over decades. They don't, it's not an exciting future to come and do that. They are digital native. They are used to a different paradigm. So it's really it's not just a intergenerational clash, it's a clash of paradigms. And so it's not that they're lazy or stupid or they don't understand you because they don't want to work. And the other way around, it's like, it's just two different paradigms. And both of them are valuable in their own way. And they cannot be mixed easily. But if you do it smartly, you can combine it and win in a way that no startup out there can, because they're starting at zero. And you're starting with something valuable, something durable, something that has been built and that has compounded over decades. So yeah, with that, I guess, ab Karela khatam ho gaya to, now the good stuff, hopefully. So thank you.
Round of applause for our speaker. So we have to understand, अगर legacy soul है, तो AI speed है, and we have to both the things have to coexist. In this light, I would like to invite our speaker, Mr. Ridwan, for the panel discussion on the dais. Also, I would like to invite Dr. Ashavan Gupta ji for the panel discussion, and Shri Ashwini Goyal ji for the panel discussion.
तो इस बार हमने सोचा कि स्पीकर आते हैं, टॉक देते हैं और चले जाते हैं। फैक्ट ये है कि रितवान ने जो इतना कुछ बोला, आपका तो मालूम नहीं, मेरा तो आधे से ज़्यादा सिर के ऊपर से गया। तो हमने सोचा कि इस बार ऐसे नहीं जाने देंगे, अपने जो सवाल हैं वो थोड़ा सा पूछ के कोशिश करेंगे कि हम नालायकों को भी थोड़ा बहुत समझ आ जाए ये आजकल का डिजिटल। और ये कल आए थे और जितना ये बोल रहे थे पैराडाइम, मेरे ख्याल पता नहीं 85 बार शब्द यूज़ करा इन्होंने पैराडाइम। कल से भी घर पे बोले जा रहे थे, तो मेरे को जाके गूगल पे ना देखना पड़ा कि पैराडाइम है क्या। तो सबसे पहले तो रितवान हमें यही बताओ कि व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय पैराडाइम।
तो ये कोई क्या कहते हैं आसान जैसे कोई शब्द नहीं है, जैसे ये गाय है या वो कुत्ता है सड़क पे, ऐसे नहीं कह सकते। तो पर एक कॉन्सेप्ट है, एक आइडिया, और उसको फॉर्मली डिफाइन करना मुश्किल है, पर आप सोचोगे तो समझ में आ जाएगा। तो वो ऐसी चीज़ें, और ऐसे काफ़ी चीज़ें होती हैं। इसका मतलब आप अगर तो पैराडाइम एक ओवरऑल फ्रेमवर्क है जिसमें कुछ हो रहा है, कोई सिस्टम चल रहा है, और उसके पीछे एक माइंडसेट है, उसके पीछे कुछ असम्पशंस हैं, उसके पीछे अलग अलग चीज़ें हैं। तो ब्रॉडली उसका ये मतलब है। तो अगर आप हम किसी खेल का सोच रहे हैं, तो वो रूल्स किसी खेल के जो फोर्स करती हैं वो पैराडाइम है। तो जैसे आप बास्केटबॉल में बॉल को लात नहीं मारेंगे या फुटबॉल में हाथ से नहीं पकड़ लेंगे। तो ये बेसिकली आप अगर एक गेम खेल रहे हैं तो गेम क्या है और किस फ्रेमवर्क में खेला जा रहा है और क्यों खेला जा रहा है वगैरह।
Ritwan, I would like to ask, what is actually legacy business?
ये तो आप बता पाएंगे पर
No, scientific instrument industry of Ambala is more than 100 years old. So any business which is in the second or third generation, is it a legacy business or
so I would say anything that's legacy is something that's industrial paradigm, that is, that was born at a time where some of the newer technologies didn't exist. So a traditional industrial only business, and industrial does not mean only manufacturing. It can be also, like we saw the 5 value functions, you can be an insurance business, so you're in the risk pooling business, right? You can be a distribution business, etc. But overall the idea is, let's say before a lot of the technologies we are all carrying around, in our pockets, whether it's a phone, etc., existed. So that's how I would broadly define it.
Another thing I would like to ask, the trend which we are seeing in smaller towns like Ambala, this coming generation, let us say who are now in the age group of 20 to 25, they are generally not joining their parental business. So one thing, what is the problem, what is the solution? And secondly, is this trend prevalent throughout the world, or is it specific to India or Ambala? Your ideas on this?
So wherever I have not been around the world, but the few places I've been to, I think there's a similar pattern. This intergenerational transfer is not just about 2 generations that are apart, it's also 2 paradigms that are apart, because the older generation grew up with a certain worldview in a certain context, right, with certain constraints, with certain challenges. All of those have changed, and that's what the paradigm means. It's really all these things combined. And so the new generation does not want to move back in time. I think that's obvious. No one would want to go back in time. But I think once there is clarity on, look, what has been built is of value and it's compounding in its own way, but you can add more dimensions. You can make it a multi-paradigm business. That suddenly becomes exciting. That's a challenge, and it's a challenge where you are playing with an existing strength. So if I don't have a legacy family business and I try to build something from scratch, I'm starting at 0. Anyone who has a legacy family business with all its challenges, with all its problems, right? I'm not saying it's easy, but you at least have, you're going into the fight with a bazooka while everyone else is going empty-handed or with a knife. So, you're well placed to play the game, I think. Only if you see it like that, and if you try not to play the game of the past, you play the game of the future.
Thank you.
मैं थोड़ा सा एक स्टेप पीछे की तरफ ले जाकर थोड़ा सा आप ऑडियंस को ये बताएं कि आपकी जर्नी कैसे रही पौंडीचेरी आश्रम के स्कूल से और फिर आगे फ्रांस और जर्मनी, तो पता लगेगा कि क्या बैकग्राउंड है।
तो बहुत ओपन एंडेड सवाल है, पर क्विक स्टेप्स में तो ऑल्टरनेटिव स्कूलिंग से पहले फॉर्मल स्कूलिंग का शिफ्ट था, तो मास्टर्स एकोल नॉर्मल सुपेरियर पेरिस में, पारिस सक्ले, तो वहाँ फुल स्कॉलरशिप मिली, तो वहाँ मास्टर्स किया गणित में,
किस सब्जेक्ट?
मैथमेटिक्स में। और बहुत पीछे देखते हुए अच्छा पैटर्न दिखता है, जब उसमें गुजर रहे थे तो बिल्कुल रैंडम और डरावना लगता था, पर बाय चांस जहाँ मास्टर्स शुरू किया वहाँ एक एआई की, मशीन लर्निंग जो भी कहना चाहते हैं, सिग्नल प्रोसेसिंग की, तो ये जो जिसे आज एआई कहते हैं उसका एक मास्टर्स प्रोग्राम था जो 1997 में शुरू किया था रॉबर्ट एजनकॉट ने। तो काफ़ी लंबा ट्रेडिशन था वहाँ डिपार्टमेंट में इन टॉपिक्स पे काम करने का, अलग तरह के सिग्नल्स, डेटा और सिग्नल्स के साथ, तो फिज़िकल ऑडियो वेव्स, फिज़िकल वेव्स, ऑडियो वेव्स, सैटेलाइट इमेजरी, बायोमेडिकल डेटा, अलग अलग तरह के ऑप्शन, स्पेशलाइजेशन और कोर्सेज थे। तो वो चांस की बात थी और कोई एक्सप्लेनेशन नहीं है। और उसके बाद फिर इंटर्नशिप सोसाइटी जनरल में की, जो फ्रेंच कॉर्पोरेट इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंक है, और वहाँ रिस्क मॉडल्स पे काम किया। फिर ब्रेक्जिट हो गया तो ढूंढ रहे थे कहाँ क्या हो सकता है, और फिर एनर्जी ट्रेडिंग में नौकरी मिली। तो ये जो बिजली तार में जाती है, ये भी समझाना बहुत मुश्किल था, क्योंकि मेरी मदर ने सोचा, जब किसी को बताती थी कि मैं डोर टू डोर जाके बिजली का कॉन्ट्रैक्ट बेच रहा था, पर नहीं, वो इसके पीछे होलसेल मार्केट है जो स्टॉक एक्सचेंज की तरह है, पर फिज़िकल बिजली की। तो उसके बाद अलग अलग चीज़ें की, कंसल्टिंग किया, फिर काफ़ी एस्टैब्लिश 100 साल पुरानी जर्मन 1 बिलियन से ज़्यादा रेवेन्यू की टूल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग और मेनली डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की कंपनी में डेटा साइंस के प्रोजेक्ट्स किए, तो अलग अलग चीज़ें की।
तो फिर वो सब छोड़ के किताब लिखने की तरफ कैसे?
वो वैसे फिर से कोई ऐसा लॉजिक नहीं था उस तरह से, पर क्या हुआ कि एक रियल एस्टेट टेक्नोलॉजी कंपनी में चीफ टेक्नोलॉजी ऑफिसर बना था, और फिर उसके बाद इंटरेस्ट रेट्स बहुत बढ़ गए, तो ग्रोथ से प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी पे पिवट किया, और उसके बाद एक बार वो कंपनी अब भी है, वो कुछ 700-800 मिलियन डॉलर एसेट्स अंडर मैनेजमेंट कुछ ही सालों में सोर्स किए, फ्रैक्शनल रेजिडेंशियल रियल एस्टेट के वगैरह, तो वो चल रही है, पर वहाँ कुछ और करने को नहीं था। तो फिर मौका मिला और घर पे बात की और कहा कि चलो कुछ नया करते हैं। और उसके बाद पहले एक कंपनी के साथ काम किया, ट्रेडिशनल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कंपनी में, और फिर देखा कि एक ही डिमेंशन पे गाड़ी चल रही है, और है इतने डिमेंशन खेलने के, और स्पेशली डेटा के पर्सपेक्टिव से अगर आपको सच्ची में वैल्यू निकालना है तो आप एक नींबू को निचोड़ नहीं सकते, अगर 5 नींबू हैं तो, और स्कोप ज़्यादा है, तो इसलिए उससे फिर 10 साल के फ्रस्ट्रेशन एक्सपीरियंस वगैरह को किसी तरह किताब में निचोड़ के निकाल दिया। तो
वो अभी नेक्स्ट में करते हैं। हम जो लिख के लाए हुए हैं ना वो खत्म हो जाएंगे।
Let me ask you one thing. See, in my view, history of Ambala is intertwined with history of scientific instrumentation industry in Ambala. Although not many people from scientific instrument industry are there, but my focus is that industry only. So you defined three things: platform, then digital, and one traditional, that what we are doing. So traditional, it exists, it is there in whatever shape, but it has some value, that way you are right. So how can we basically measure our strength, and how can we, is it possible, like you told, it is difficult to manage two platforms two things, two paradigm together. But how do we recognize our strength? It is there, but how do we identify with it? Is there any method or something like that?
So that's a very specific discussion, right? In the sense that um, the most important thing is not to just benchmark along the industrial paradigm, because that's what you're used to. And so I think if you say our products are not very high end, right? So in terms of production or the industrial paradigm, you're not in the premium segment. But that does not mean that you don't have a strength, because if let's say a product is cheaper, right, or it's is more widely usable, right? If you add a allocation and distribution angle to your business, right, now suddenly the same business, because you're seeing it two-dimensionally, has a lot more value. And so the most important thing is not to look at only the current paradigm or the current dimension in which you're operating, is to add, and don't add all five, right, value functions or all three paradigms, but think about which ones are the most relevant. And again, it's just five, right? It's not 500, so it's not that hard. I mean, of course, it requires thinking, and there's no rush, right? Because this is not something that will put food on the table tomorrow, right? That's not the goal. But once you think deeply enough, out of the five, you will identify one that you think makes the most sense, and then it makes sense to go all in, right? Because it's, as long as it's logically consistent and you think about the conflicts. I think the important thing is there are conflicts between the paradigms. You cannot just naively combine them. And so, like I said, suppression of variance to maintain quality in production, mad variance and experimentation in the digital paradigm to discover demand. These are two things that, two approaches that, let's say, आप कहेंगे कि किसी भी तरह का वेरिएशन कम होना चाहिए, नहीं तो प्रोडक्ट क्वालिटी ख़राब होगी. और अगर आपकी बेटी बिजनेस ज्वाइन करती हैं तो वो कहेंगी कि पर पापा हमें एक्सपेरिमेंट करना होगा, कैसे पता चलेगा? हम तमिलनाडु के कस्टमर के लिए एक चीज़ ट्राई करेंगे, महाराष्ट्र के कस्टमर के लिए कुछ और, हिमाचल के कस्टमर, क्योंकि अलग कस्टमर हैं, अलग प्रॉब्लम्स हैं, अलग उनके सिलेबस होंगे, अलग बोर्ड स्ट्रक्चर, जो भी मुझे भी उतना नहीं पता उस सेक्टर का, पर यूजेज अलग होगी हर जगह. तो उसे डिस्कवर करना आप अम्बाला से बैठ के कर सकते हैं. ये बदल गया. आपको वहाँ जाके खुद बैठ के लोगों के साथ मिलना केवल ज़रूरी नहीं है. आप एक्सपेरिमेंटेशन, लर्निंग, यूज़र डिमांड का यहाँ से बैठ के कर सकते हैं. पर और दोनों अलग है. इसका मतलब आप ये वाली सोच वहाँ नहीं लगा सकते और ये वाली सोच उल्टी तरफ नहीं लगा सकते.
But you have to run one unit, na?
तो you run production in the industrial paradigm, but you run the newer aspects of the business. Let's say you add distribution, access, whatever. So you run those in the digital paradigm. The demand discovery part, the one that is around use cases, right? Because if you say, let's say, you say I make a microscope, right? So the microscope is the product. As far as making the microscope is concerned, you please stay in the industrial paradigm, because that's optimized for that. But then the question is, who will use this microscope and for what? That's the digital paradigm, right? So draw a cut there, say, मैं ये कर रहा हूँ और आप अपनी बेटी को कहिए कि आप ये देखो, ठीक है? क्योंकि and there is no overlap, right? In the sense that आप इस पे काम अलग से कर सकते हैं in a modular way, पर यहाँ से जो insight आ रहा है, that can be fed back into R&D, into production.
So incidentally, my daughter is here, and despite my insistence, she didn't join family business. So do you think it will help if we take her opinion why she didn't join the family business?
I don't want to make enemies, but
Shall it come?
Yeah. We can do it off stage also, no problem.
She is my daughter Vaishali, and many times I asked her to join family business, to go to engineering college, join EPIC, make something new. But she never got interested. So now that Mr. Ritwan is here, I think he can act as a catalyst for bringing her back to Ambala. Vaishali, your views, please.
Hi, it was a great session. So I think why I didn't family business is I don't understand the concept of pen and paper business. From the beginning of my journey, I've always worked on computers. I've always understood data. And without data, I was not able to understand how to function, how to process things. So that is, I think, the major reason why I couldn't do that. And the other thing is, e-commerce, if I am to speak about e-commerce side, I've grown, I've always thought of myself by seeing television, by using Facebook, by going on Instagram, that business ऐसे ही चलता है. हम कुछ प्रोडक्ट देख रहे हैं टीवी पे तो हाँ सेल्स वहाँ से आ रही है. अब जो पापा करते थे बचपन में टूर्स पे जाकर वेंडर्स के पास जा रहे हैं, डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर्स के पास जा रहे हैं, वो चीज़ मुझे कभी समझ ही नहीं आई कि पर्सनल कनेक्शंस कैसे बनाने हैं.
तो वही दो पैराडाइम हो गए. ये थैंक यू फॉर दिस.
मुझे वो
बिल्कुल यही, और ये हर फैमिली बिजनेस में हो रहा है दुनिया भर में. जितना भी मैंने देखा यही चक्कर है हमेशा कि ये एक पैराडाइम है, चल रहा है, बहुत अच्छा है, बहुत मुश्किल से निकले हैं, और ये एक नया पैराडाइम है और एक ही फैमिली है, एक ही बिजनेस है. बस ये ब्रिज बनाना है कि आप प्रोडक्ट तक बना लो, उसके बाद वैशाली देखेगी. ठीक है. और पर आप जो सीख रहे हो डेटा में पैटर्न्स देख रहे हो वो आप इनको दीजिए, और आपको जो प्रोडक्ट बनाने में जो चैलेंजेस आ रहे हैं वो आप उसको बताइए. बस ये लूप क्लोज करनी है. तो फिर उसके इससे पहले कि मैं क्या AI खरीद के यूज़ करूं, ये लूप अगर क्लोज हो जाए फिर इसके ऊपर चाहे आप जितना AI डाल दो उससे ज़्यादा निकलेगा. पर ये लूप क्लोज करना ज़रूरी है, और इतनी वैल्यू है ये है यहाँ. नहीं तो अब क्या होगा कि आप कहीं शहर में किसी MNC में काम करोगे और आप इसे बंद कर दोगे तो अंबाला का नुकसान होगा, आपका सबका नुकसान होगा, इसमें किसी का फ़ायदा नहीं हो रहा.
तो मेरे फादर प्रोडक्ट समझते हैं, मैं डेटा समझती हूँ, पर
तो
उसके
जोड़ना
बीच का
है.
gap हम नहीं बना पा रहे
और
हैं.
इसलिए आपको उनको ये समझाने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, आपको उनको अपना डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर का जो पुराना तरीका है समझाने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. आप बस हैंड ओवर क्लियर कर दो कि ठीक है ये प्रोडक्ट है, ये स्पेसिफिकेशन है और ये कॉन्टेक्स्ट है. आपको अगर सवाल है मुझे पूछना, और आप अपना बाकी का खड़ा करना शुरू कर दो, और वहाँ से जो इंसाइट्स आते हैं कि अच्छा इस स्टेट में ये यूज़ हो रहा है या इस तरह के लैब में इस तरह के माइक्रोस्कोप की ज़रूरत है, वो आप यहाँ वापस दे देना. उतना इन्फॉर्मेशन और नहीं देना. उनको ये मत समझाइए कि फेसबुक एड्स कैसे चलते हैं या ये पाइथन में मैंने ये स्क्रिप्ट चलाया, वो उनको समझने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. बिकॉज ही विल बी ओवरवेल्म्ड जस्ट लाइक यू विल बी ओवरवेल्म्ड इफ ही टेक्स यू टू डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर मीटिंग्स. So I think if you have a clear, that's why the two paradigms and the interface, you cannot mix these in a naive way. You will die of boredom if you go with him on distributor meetings, and he will freak out if you run him through, the kind of analysis you're doing.
Thank you, Vishal.
थैंक यू वैशाली. पर जो मेरे को इससे पहले कि इनकी वो जो टॉक थी उसमें समझ आया, जो एक चीज़ इन्होंने बोली कि ये जितनी स्टार्टअप्स बन रही हैं वो स्टार्टअप कहाँ से शुरू हो रही हैं? ज़ीरो से. यहाँ पर ही सेज कि यू हैव अ प्लेटफॉर्म, सो यू बिल्ड अ स्टार्टअप फ्रॉम दैट प्लेटफॉर्म. तो आपको एक लेवल मिल गया जिसके ऊपर बिल्ड करने के लिए. तो ये एक इंटरेस्टिंग कॉन्सेप्ट है जिसमें आपके डेटा की समझ को यूज़ करके एग्जिस्टिंग जो बिजनेस है उसको हम ग्रो कर सकें. कई सारे सवाल ऑडियंस के भी हैं, लोग हाथ उठा रहे हैं. मैं जल्दी से 2-4 चीज़ें और आपसे पूछनी है. आपकी किताब में या पता नहीं पॉडकास्ट में कहीं पर ये पढ़ा था, पॉडकास्ट में था शायद, आपके एक होस्ट ने पूछा था कि आपके छोटे से शॉर्ट करियर में AI ने इतनी दफ़ा चेंज कर लिया, उसका क्या मतलब था?
मैं एक बहुत एस्टैब्लिश्ड प्रोफेसर प्रिंसटन के, अरविंद नारायण, उन्होंने एक किताब लिखी AI स्नेक ऑयल. तो पहले उनकी एनालॉजी यूज़ करता हूँ क्योंकि ये सवाल बहुत आता है कि है क्या AI. और वो कहते हैं वो ऐसे जैसे आप कह रहे हो कि ये ट्रांसपोर्ट है. तो अब मैं ट्रांसपोर्ट शब्द यूज़ करूँ तो सबके दिमाग में कुछ है, इसका मतलब कुछ चीज़ कहीं से कहीं जा रही है, पर कैसे जा रही है वो बहुत अलग है. कोई स्कूटर पे जा रहा है, कोई हवाई जहाज़ में जा रहा है, कोई नाव से जा रहा है. जो तो ट्रांसपोर्ट एक बहुत अम्ब्रेला टर्म है, और एआई भी करीब वैसा ही है। तो उसके अंदर फिर लोग लड़ना शुरू करते हैं कि मैं जो कर रहा हूँ वो एआई है, तुम जो कर रहे हो नहीं हो वगैरह। पर ज़्यादातर वेंडर मार्केट कंसल्टेंट वगैरह तो वो हर चीज़ पे एआई लेबल लगा देते हैं बेचने को। तो जैसे अगर ये ट्रांसपोर्ट की बात हो रही है, तो आप चाहे साइकिल रिक्शा चला रहे हो, आप कह रहे हो मैं एआई, अगर ये ट्रांसपोर्ट के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में देखें तो वो भी एआई कर रहा है, और जो फाइटर जेट उड़ा रहा है वो भी सभी एआई कर रहे हैं। और अगर मैं अपनी एनालॉजी दूं, पिछले 10 साल में इसे एक सर्कस की तरह सोच सकते हैं। एक बड़ा टेंट है, उसके अंदर एक क्लाउन है और एक शायद घोड़ा है जो ट्रिक्स करता है। फिर उसके बाद 2 साल बाद एक उसमें भालू आ जाता है जो साइकिल चलाता है, तो लोग कहते हैं ये एआई हो गया। तो वो पहले का भी एआई है, क्योंकि लोग आ रहे हैं टेंट में सर्कस को देखने। फिर एक नई चीज़ आती है, कोई आग से जादू करता है, तो लोग कह ओह ये भी एआई है अभी। तो सारा फोकस वो जो नया ट्रिक है उससे आप लोगों को टेंट में लाते हो, बाकी आप सब बेच रहे हो उनको। तो करीब करीब मेरे ये मेटाफर मुझे सबसे अच्छा लगता है, क्योंकि इसमें पढ़ना कि टेक्निकली डेफिनेशन के हिसाब से ये है और ये नहीं है, उसका कोई वो फालतू क्या डिस्कशन है। क्योंकि फाइनली एक टेंट है ब्रॉडली, और उसमें लोगों को अंदर ला के सामान बेचना है करीब करीब। तो फिर आप लेबल चाहे जितना लगा लो। और अभी जो हुआ है, क्योंकि पहले के जो ये एक तरह से वेव्स थे नई नई टेक्नोलॉजी के, वो यहाँ अम्बाला में नहीं उसकी कोई बात कर रहा था, क्योंकि ज़रूरत नहीं थी, आप इंटरेक्ट नहीं कर रहे थे उससे। ये जब चैट जीपीटी लॉन्च हुआ और उसके जो सारे वेरिएशन हैं अलग अलग कंपनियों के, वो हर एक ने यूज़ किया है, तो ये फ़र्क है। तो वो ऐसा है कि आप सर्कस गए और अलग तरह के लोगों को अलग चीज़ें अच्छी लग रही हैं। किसी को भालू साइकिल पे अच्छा लग रहा है, किसी को हाथी अच्छा लग रहा है जो कुछ उछल के कर रहा है, जो भी। अब ये पहली बार ऐसी चीज़ है कि किसी ने सर्कस में ऐसा ट्रिक किया जो हर एक घर पे जाके कर सकता है। इसका मतलब उसने कुछ स्टंट किया या कुछ करके दिखाया, और सबको लगता है ये मज़ेदार है, मैं भी कर सकता हूँ। तो आप घर के जाके करोगे, फिर घर के 5 लोग देखेंगे, तो वो कहेंगे अच्छा ये तो हम भी कर सकते हैं। तो जो वायरलिटी उससे आई है, उससे इतनी हवा बनी है। पर इसका मतलब नहीं है कि कोई टेक्नोलॉजिकली बहुत ही ज़रूर क्या कहते हैं प्रोग्रेस ज़रूर हुआ है, पर मेरे ख्याल से जितनी वायरलिटी है उससे कहीं कम हुआ है। तो ये भी रखना दिमाग में ज़रूरी है, क्योंकि 10 साल पहले भी मुझे यही पूछा जाता था कि एआई है क्या और इससे क्या दुनिया जीवन बदल जाएगा। तो और एक मज़ेदार जोक है, मैं नहीं कह रहा क्योंकि रिलीजियस चीज़ों में सेंटिमेंट किसी का हर्ट नहीं करना है, पर जोक मज़ेदार है इसलिए किसी और का कहा हुआ शेयर करता हूँ। तो वो ऐसे है कि एआई को अगर प्रॉफिट मान ले या किसी तरह का अवतार जो भी मान ले, तो एक कैंप है जो कह रहा है कि बस आने ही वाला है, अभी तो ठीक नहीं चल रहा है, बस आ ही जाएगा। और दूसरा कैंप कह रहा है कि आ गया है पर बदला नहीं है कुछ। तो वही उन दोनों एक्सट्रीम्स में ही फंसे हैं कि कुछ लोग इंतज़ार में हैं कि और अच्छी हो जाएगी फिर दुनिया बदल जाएगी, और दूसरे लोग कह रहे हैं ये तो आ गया, पर बाकी लोग कह रहे हैं कि हमें तो कोई बहुत बड़ा बदलाव भी नहीं दिख रहा। तो और ये जो ओवरवेलमिंग का जो फीलिंग है वो इससे आ रहा है, क्योंकि दोनों नैरेटिव्स जो हैं इतने एक्सट्रीम हैं और दोनों यूजलेस हैं। इसका मतलब आप बिजनेस ओनर के तौर पे क्या करोगे, चाहे अगर आप कहो कि बस आने वाला है तो अच्छा मैं क्या करूं आज, मेरी क्या एजेंसी है इसमें। और अगर दूसरी तरफ देखें कि आ गया है तो भाई आ गया तो आप क्या करोगे, आ गया अपने आप में। तो वो जैसे टाइगर सफारी में गाइड को पूछा कि टाइगर आएगा तो क्या करेंगे, तो जो टाइगर करेगा वो करेगा, आप में आपकी एजेंसी नहीं है उसमें। तो वही वाला नैरेटिव बना दिया है कि आप तो कुछ नहीं कर सकते, चाहे ये हो चाहे वो हो, एआई करेगा आप पे। पर ये फालतू नैरेटिव है। इसका मतलब यू हैव एजेंसी, यू हैव स्ट्रेंथ्स एंड यू नीड टू एक्ट ऑन दोज, नो वन विल कम एंड डू इट फॉर यू।
तो आजकल जितनी भी बातचीत है, जो कुछ है, हवा हर तरफ ये है, एआई पता नहीं ऐसी क्या चीज़ आ गई जिसने पूरी जीवन बदल जाएगा सबका। और इस चीज़ पे ये पहले व्यक्ति ऐसे मिले जो कह रहे हैं कि भाई इस हाइप में ना जाओ, अच्छी चीज़ है, इस्तेमाल करने की है, लेकिन ये सब कुछ बदल जाएगा। और इसका एक बहुत बढ़िया एग्जाम्पल उस आर्टिकल में आपने दिया था माइक्रोस्कोप का, बहुत संक्षिप्त में वो बताएंगे माइक्रोस्कोप्स के आने से क्या हुआ था?
तो ये जो नैरेटिव है कि नई टेक्नोलॉजी आ गई उससे दुनिया बदल गई, ये जो 2 स्टेप में है कि नई टेक्नोलॉजी बनी, कोई नया टेक टूल बना और उससे दुनिया बदल गई, इससे मुझे लगा कि थोड़ा सिंपलिस्टिक है ये, ऐसे शायद कभी कभी हुआ है कभी कभी नहीं हुआ है। तो 2 चीज़ें कंपेयर करते हैं और ये करीब लेट 1600s में 1660s 70s की बात है यूरोप में तब। तो पहले माइक्रोस्कोप यूज़ हुक, लेवनहोक वगैरह 65 से लेके 74-5 के रेंज में यूज़ करते हैं। तो पहली बार उसके थ्रू देख के उनको एक नई दुनिया दिखती है जो अब तक आप आँख से नहीं देख पा रहे थे, और उसको वो दे ड्रॉ इट, तो so they make detailed drawings and then they publish it and everyone gets excited because no one has seen this. This is, you know, this is a new universe that has opened up. And the thing is, anyone can look through the microscope. You don't need to be technically savvy to look through the microscope. And so it has the same virality thing, which is that you can do it and anyone can do it. You don't need to be a scientist to evaluate something. The second thing is that every time you look through it, you might see something different, right? Because the sample, you know, could be different. The sample could have, if it's living, it could have changed in the meantime. So there is that element of every time I look at it, there is a surprise, right? Something cool can happen. And the third thing is because it's so new and exciting, you want to talk about it. And so in the 1660s, 70s, etc., when the microscope sort of hit the stage in Europe, the excitement spread like crazy. Everyone wanted to look through it. And people were writing about it, and people were drawing stuff they saw, except it was all nonsense because lighting wasn't standardized. The preparation of the specimen that was being studied wasn't standardized. And so what people were very often seeing was illusions or hallucinations, because it was perhaps, for the same thing, if you change the lighting, you see something different. If the specimen has not been cleaned properly, what you are seeing is actually properties of the glass on which the specimen is, not the thing itself. And so that led to 150 years at least of clinical microbiology being stuck in gas, like no progress. They're just, people are doing things, they're doing experiments, they're documenting it, they're sharing it, but there is no real progress in clinical microbiology as a science. And so when I shared this with a friend who is a PhD in math from Brown, etc., and he's very, he challenged me, he said, okay, this seems a bit simplistic, what about the telescope? And so thanks to his question, I said, okay, let's look into that. Around the same time, and if you look at it from a tech tool perspective, अगर microscope एक tube में 2 refractive lenses है, तो telescope technologically वही चीज़ है. इसका मतलब एक tube में 2 refractive lenses है. But Galileo points it to the skies. He's not trying to look at the minuscule. Galileo points it to the skies, and astronomy goes through a mad revolution right away. And then the question for me was, the same tech tool in 2 different domains results in 2 very different outcomes. And what I was trying to understand was why. And if we take a step back and look at the state of like the system in which the microscope enters clinical microbiology. In fact, clinical microbiology has not even been defined formally as a field, right? It's just hobbies. If you look at astronomy on the other hand, right, you already have a lot of, you first had a theory of geocentrism, right? So the idea was everything turns around the Earth. So there was a working model, which was wrong, but at least there was some model of what's going on. The second thing is that you had detailed measurements already done before the microscope came out. And so you had a lot of empirical data that was not visual, right? That was measurements using sextants and other instruments of the time of the movement of the planets. And very soon after the initial measurements by Galileo, Kepler comes up with a working model that kind of makes sense. And then so you now can test what you see. You can test it with some kind of causal mathematical model of what's going on. And the most important thing is you're looking at the skies, you're looking at planets, at moons, at stars. They have standardized lighting. right? It's not your light in your room, in your lab, or wherever you're working with your microscope. It's standardized lighting. That means if 3 of us look at this, and if we see the same thing, right, today, and if all of you look at the same planet, star, moon, whatever tomorrow, you will see the same thing. And so the fact that you have some kind of empirical, verifiable, repeatable foundation, along with the rigor of causal thinking, of lack of hype, right, of focus on empirical data and facts, is what drives progress. And so my big problem with my field today is that we're just pumping a hype bubble, right? And that does not mean that the technology doesn't have value. The microscope has massive value, but it took 150 years, or for some things, 200 years for it to really bring value. And that is where value gets created, and that is where you can create value independent of the AI vendors.
तो ये मुझे तो ये समझ आया है इससे कि AI में वैल्यू तो है, पर ये जो इतनी हाइप है कि अभी कुछ हो जाएगा और दुनिया बदल जाएगी, वो शायद ज़रूरी नहीं है. वो माइक्रोस्कोप का एग्जांपल है कि 150 साल भी लगे थे उसको कुछ यूज़ में आने के लिए. तो इसी से जुड़ा हुआ एक सवाल और, क्या AI सच में सारी जॉब्स ले जाएगा?
नो. तो पर इसके पीछे भी इसका मतलब, let's just do a devil's argument thing, right? Can we find a single example in history where one thing just wiped out everything? And there's a whole, like, again, a systems understanding helps from first principles, because if no one has jobs and something is being produced, who is going to buy it, right? So there's an economic argument why it does not make any sense, because just if you say we automate everything or AI does everything and we don't, there are no jobs. So the question is, who is going to buy stuff, right? So it's not just your business, it's not your industry. There's a whole load of stuff that breaks down. And so any kind of absurd, extreme assumption like this, if you just take a step back and think about the implications outside of your business, they don't make sense anymore. And so it's obvious that that's not going to happen. I mean,
so एक और इन्होंने एक आर्टिकल भेजा था, वो तो ये क्वेश्चन बनाने की तैयारी करते हुए वो कई चीज़ें पढ़नी पड़ी, तो उसमें जो चीज़ लिखी हुई थी वो बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग थी. वो कहते कि अभी वो तरुण मेहता जी बैठे थे, पता नहीं अभी हैं या चले गए, तो अभी आपको कोई भी कॉन्ट्रैक्ट बनवाना होता है तो आप एडवोकेट के पास जाते हो, लॉयर के पास जाते हो, और वो कुछ ड्राफ्ट करके देता है. AI ने अब ये तो कर दिया कि बस टाइप करो और वो 2 मिनट के अंदर आपको एक कॉन्ट्रैक्ट का ड्राफ्ट दे देता है. पर वो नेक्स्ट स्टेप क्या है? उसको वेरीफाई कौन करेगा कि क्या वो जिस कॉन्टेक्स्ट के लिए मांगा गया था वैसा है या नहीं? तो आज की डेट में वो वेरीफाई करने के लिए ह्यूमन ही चाहिए. और मे बी फ्यूचर में AI इतनी इंटेलिजेंट और हो जाए कि वो काफ़ी वेरिफिकेशन भी कर दे. पर जो उस एग्जाम्पल में जो चीज़ कही थी कि जहाँ ह्यूमन रिप्लेस ही नहीं हो सकता, वो ये है कि हमें कोई ऐसा व्यक्ति चाहिए जो जिम्मा ले, जो कहे कि हाँ मैं इस पे साइन कर रहा हूँ और मेरा साइन ये कह रहा है कि ये जो चीज़ है ये सही है, और आई विल स्टेक माई लाइफ कह लो या माई नेम फॉर इट कि ये काम करेगा. इस इंजीनियरिंग डिज़ाइन है, कोई तो इंजीनियर चाहिए जो कहेगा कि ये इतना ऊंचा हॉल बनाया और ये जो डिज़ाइन हुआ है कि ये टिकेगा, और अगर नहीं टिकेगा तो मुझे पकड़ लेना. तो इसलिए ये सोचना कि AI से सारी जॉब्स ख़त्म हो जाएंगी, ये इतना कोई सही नहीं है. हाँ, फ़र्क पड़ेगा, पर ह्यूमंस की और नीड्स बढ़ती जाएंगी.
इसमें आज सुबह ही देखा एक एग्जांपल. इसका मतलब MDI जो प्रोडक्ट बना रहा है वो देखने में तो कागज़ ही लग रहा है. तो अगर मैं कागज़ दे दूं किसी को और कहूं कि ये आप यूज़ कर लो, तो एक बार यूज़ करके फिर ब्लॉक कर देंगे। तो यही हो रहा है। इसका मतलब अब मैं बिना लॉयर हुए कोई कॉन्ट्रैक्ट एक प्रॉम्प्ट से जनरेट कर दूंगा। इसका मतलब नहीं कि मैं उसको कोर्ट में जाके लड़ सकूंगा, या मैं अभी माइक्रोस्कोप की फ़ोटो ऑनलाइन देख के बना के मैं कह दूं कि हाँ मैं आई विल कम्पीट विद अश्विनी जी's बिजनेस। वो someone will buy it once and they will realize is, you know, yes, there is glass, plastic or whatever the components are, but I have no understanding of what that does and for what it's used. And so the big difference and why it's gotten so viral is now with one prompt you can generate some artifact, some output, but there is like you have, it's not the thing itself that matters, because as we said in the digital paradigm, the costs of replication are zero. So if you can generate something, so can everyone else. But the reason why someone buys something from you or hires you or whatever is everything else beyond just the artifact. It's not just producing the artifact, it's the outcomes it guarantees, right? It's the reliability it guarantees. That's what you're getting paid money for, right? That's why I keep using the word value. That's value, right? It's not the thing. It's not just a paper strip, right? It's not just a few lenses with some encasing, right? And this is a frame, the article I sent you was by Dustin Schaefer from Henderson Engineers. And I think it's a very, very rigorous and rational approach to thinking about what is value and work and why do we pay for something. We're not paying for the contract, we're paying for the fact that if something goes wrong, that lawyer will show up in court and fight the case for us, right? We're not paying for an insurance policy document. We're paying for the fact that when a flood hits, that insurer will transfer money to our account, right? That is what we're paying for. And so just because I can generate an insurance policy document does not mean that I'm an insurer.
तो सवाल तो और भी कई थे, पर मैंने कागज अंदर रख दिया क्योंकि 2-3 हाथ पहले उठ चुके हैं, 9 बज रहे हैं, वो सवाल हम जरूर लेंगे। मैंने अभी तक 4 हाथ देखे थे, मैं जिस सीक्वेंस में आए थे उसी सीक्वेंस में उनके पास जाऊं। सुभाष जी, आपका सबसे पहले।
सबसे पहले तो मैं ये कहना चाहूँगा कि आपको अपनी भाषा में बोलते सुन करके बहुत अच्छा लगा। अगर आप इंग्लिश में बोलते समझ तब भी आता, लेकिन जितना अपनी मातृभाषा में सुन करके समझना आसान होता है वो कुछ और ही मज़ा देता है। दूसरी बात, शुरू से लेकर अब तक ये सेशन जितना इन्फॉर्मेटिव चला है तो बहुत ही अच्छा रहा, और जिस तरह से हम लोग सोचते हैं वही निष्कर्ष आपके देख करके हमें अपने आप पर ये हुआ कि हम कोई बहुत ज़्यादा गलत नहीं सोचते। तीसरी बात, आपने 1997 की बात कही जब आप फ्रांस में शायद मैथमेटिक्स का और वहाँ मशीन लर्निंग का आपने कोर्स किया। तो 1997 में उस समय हिंदुस्तान में मोबाइल आ गए थे या उससे और ज़्यादा कोई एडवांस टेक्नोलॉजी आई होगी, लेकिन हमें कम से कम उसका नहीं पता है। तो मेरा ये जानना चाहता था कि आप आजकल वहाँ जितनी तेज़ी से ये चल रहा है, अब मैं तो अपनी ज़िंदगी में देखता हूँ कि मुझे एआई की कितनी आसान उसने बता दिया कि जो चीज़ मुझे सर्च करने के लिए पहले ब्रिटानिका इंसाइक्लोपीडिया और डिक्शनरीज और क्या कुछ न जाने देखनी पड़ती थी, अब मैं एक प्रश्न पूछ करके उससे वो प्राप्त कर लेता हूँ। या मुझे कोई आर्टिकल लिखते हुए कहीं से कोई कोटेशन देनी है तो उसके कोटेशन मुझे याद है लेकिन और उसके आगे पीछे का नहीं याद है, तो मैं उसको देख करके वेरीफाई कर लेता हूँ, मेरा बहुत सा टाइम बच जाता है। मैं आपसे ये जानना चाहता हूँ कि जितनी हफड़ दफड़ और जितनी तेज़ी से ये एआई चल रही है, इसमें हिंदुस्तान की क्या स्थिति है? क्या वो इसके कदम के साथ कदम मिला करके आगे चल पाएगा या कहीं पिछड़ जाएगा? धन्यवाद।
तो ये हिंदी मेरी शब्द भंडार से थोड़ा एज पे ले गया, पर ठीक है। तो पर नहीं, मैं
आपकी नहीं है, हमारी भी। ये जब हिंदी लिखते हैं तो हम कहते हैं थोड़ी हल्की कर दो।
नहीं, पर जितनी भाषाएं बोल पाता हूँ तो जब मौका मिलता है बोलने का, चाहे जो भाषा हो, बहुत मज़ा आता है।
हाँ, इस पे मैं बता दूँ, ये जर्मन बहुत अच्छी बोलते हैं, ये फ्रेंच बहुत अच्छी बोलते हैं, और इंग्लिश तो बहुत अच्छी आपने सुनी ली।
शुक्रिया। क्लास बिल्कुल पसंद नहीं थी स्कूल में, पर ठीक है, कुछ तो काम आ रहा है। तो नहीं तो आपने जो कहा वो सर्च के लिए, सोचने के लिए, उसमें बहुत काम आता है, क्योंकि विचार आप कर रहे हैं पर आप इनपुट ढूंढ रहे हैं अलग तरह का, और पहले वो किताबों में जाके ढूंढना पड़ता था। वो जो सारा समय है इन्फॉर्मेशन तक पहुंचने का, वो अभी 1 सेकंड में हो गया है। तो ये बहुत बड़ा फ़ायदा है, और ये सच्ची में सब यूज़ कर सकते हैं, और अच्छी बात है ये। और इसमें कोई हाइप नहीं है। इसका मतलब ये ज़रूर है कि वो गलत इन्फॉर्मेशन दे सकता है, पर वो तो इंसाइक्लोपीडिया या अखबारों में या कहीं भी हो सकता है। इसका मतलब ऐसा कहीं भी 100% गारंटी कोई नहीं दे रहा वैसे भी। पर ओवरऑल आप बहुत जल्दी अलग अलग चीज़ों को साथ जोड़ सकते हो, सोच सकते हो, और जितना गहरे तरीके से आप सवाल पूछेंगे उतना ही अच्छा वो आपको जवाब दे पाएगा। तो ये सच्ची में बहुत बड़ी चीज़ है, और इसमें कोई हाइप नहीं है। इसका मतलब ये इसका बहुत फ़ायदा है, और इसका फ़ायदा उठाना चाहिए। और दूसरा ट्रांसलेशन का है। तो जैसे अगर मैं अच्छी हिंदी नहीं बोल पाता तो मैं जर्मन में बोलता, और इसको अगर कनेक्ट कर लेते तो ये वॉइस टू टेक्स्ट करता, और फिर टेक्स्ट ट्रांसलेट होता, और फिर सिंथेटिक वॉइस से वो बेसिकली मैं लाइव जर्मन में बोल रहा हूँ माइक के अंदर, पर आप हिंदी में सुन रहे हैं। तो ये सब हो सकता है, और जो काफ़ी अच्छा हो रहा है। आप टेक्स्ट समराइजेशन कर सकते हैं। तो आप एक पूरी किताब PDF के तौर पे या पूरा डॉक्यूमेंट अपलोड करके कह सकते हैं कि इसको आप एक तरह से इसकी समरी दे दीजिए। तो ज़रूरी नहीं है कि वो समरी ऐसे करे जैसे आप खुद करते, पर मोटा मोटा दे देता है जो आपको ज़रूरत है। उसके बाद आप पॉइंट बाय पॉइंट जाके समय लगा के और कर सकते हैं। तो ये सब फ़ायदे हैं, और अच्छी बात है, और सबको इसका इस्तेमाल करना चाहिए। पर ये जादू की छड़ी नहीं है। तो वो जादू की छड़ी का जो नैरेटिव है वो मुझसे को बहुत चुभता है।
एक सवाल वैसे उनका दूसरा भी था, आई डोंट नो, कि इंडिया,
ये सच बोले तो मेरा इस पे ना मेरा कोई एक्सपर्टीज़ है, ना मेरा कोई हक बनता है इस पे कुछ भी कमेंट करने का। पर ये ज़रूर कह सकते हैं कि ये आपके हाथ में है, क्योंकि आप यहाँ रहते हैं, आप कर रहे हैं। तो ये जो भी इंडिया में रहते हैं उनके हाथ में है, और जो कर सकते हैं उनके हाथ में है। और बाकी दूसरे क्या कर रहे हैं क्या नहीं कर रहे हैं, वो उसमें उतना फ़र्क क्योंकि करना तो आपको ही है, चाहे वो जो कर रहे हो। तो इसलिए ये जो बेंचमार्किंग की बीमारी हो गई है, मुझे बहुत मीन्स कोई काम की नहीं लगती, क्योंकि वो यही कहने को है कि हाँ देखिए ये हमने कर लिया, तो ठीक है, अब तो क्या इसका मतलब। तो ये बहुत मज़ेदार है, अलग देशों में रहने से जाते हुए दिखता है। तो जैसे जर्मनी में ज़्यादातर लोग आज कैश से पे करते हैं, तो जो दोस्त जानते हैं या घर के लोग कहते हैं ओ हमने तो UPI कर लिया, बहुत अच्छी बात है, पर फिर सड़क पे क्या हो रहा है? ठीक है, तो वही है कि बेंचमार्किंग क्यों कर रहे हैं? ईगो को बूस्ट करने का के अलावा उसका कोई काम नहीं है। तो इससे अच्छा कि जो अच्छा है वो उससे खुशी होनी चाहिए, उससे प्रेरणा लेनी चाहिए, और जो नहीं अच्छा है उस पर काम करना चाहिए। यही है, उससे ज़्यादा मुझे कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी नहीं दिख रही इसमें।
बहुत अच्छी तरह आंसर। नैनी भाई आप।
Good evening, everybody. The best part, what I liked was the interaction which was going on right now. We were talking about the microscopes. It was invented, say, around 100 or 150 years back. What we couldn't see with the naked eye, microscope helped us. Today we are dependent on the microscope. We accept it. Are we going to accept this artificial intelligence which we have not produced? We are using only artificial intelligence. That's what Subhash ji asked, कि इंडिया में artificial intelligence पे हम dependent हैं? क्या हम are we going to use this artificial intelligence for medical use? छोटी मोटी बीमारियों के लिए ठीक है, we can depend on artificial intelligence. But for critical disease, are we going to depend on artificial intelligence?
So I think a binary framing like this is the problem for any kind of question, right? It's not, is it this or that? It's a good way to frame the question because it makes you think of the two extremes, and so then you can look at the messy middle, right? Because the messy middle is where you see a solution. And so I think that two aspects to the question. One is, do we trust, kind of more or less in quotes, do we trust blindly what we get as output or see, right? And so the answer again is in the history of the microscope is until you had standardized lighting, standardized preparation of the specimen, standardized procedures to know that what you're seeing is reliable, is true, is empirically repeatable, etc. Until then, you shouldn't trust. Once you establish certain norms, you can start trusting within a certain range. Of course, if you see something completely crazy, you should be in doubt because perhaps you didn't prepare the specimen. The same thing with using any technology. So once you establish certain norms or governance within which something operates, you can trust it. But outside of that, you need to be careful. So if you can look at airlines or flying as an example, right? So when the Wright brothers took off more than 100 years ago, that plane barely flew and went down. If you look at if you plot the crashes of aircraft across time, तो इसका मतलब 50-60 साल पहले आप एयरक्राफ्ट में जा रहे हो तो बस किसी तरह लैंड हो जाए. अब ज़्यादातर सोचते नहीं है उतना. कभी कोई क्रैश हो जाता है तो बहुत पैनिक होती है, पर मैच्योर हो गई है टेक्नोलॉजी इंडस्ट्री वगैरह. तो आप जब आप एयरक्राफ्ट में जाते थे आप ये नहीं सोचते क्या पता आज पहुंचूंगा नहीं, कुछ हो जाएगा.
थैंक यू. अब दोनों इकट्ठे पूछ लो.
Thank you, Dr. Ashawant Gupta ji. Welcome our speaker, Ritavan. First of all, whatsoever discussion is going on, my view on that is brain skills are more important than AI. Second is that your emotional intelligence, IQ, with the traditional intelligence quotient is required. Blending of these two. Now I come to my question. I am very fond of Japanese terminology. For example, Kaizen is there, Ekagai is there, Chakdo Kiyagyo is there. They change the life. That is the philosophy of a very good life. As far as your city is concerned, Munich, is a one terminology. There is a one word. There is a one term that have changed the world, and that term is Mittelstand. Mittelstand, you will agree with me, it has revolutionized the world. And it is similar to, synonymous to this Ambala city. That is, I am talking about this small scale industries. I am talking about SME, and they have made the mark. And synonymous of this Mittelstand in Japanese is Chaklo ki Gyo. Sony can't work without these companies. Sony brand can't work. So my humble request, my humble question to you, that how Ambala as a city of mixes, Ambala as a city of scientific instruments, Ambala as a city of microscopes, Ambala as a city of this textile market, how we embrace this philosophy in our city. That is very important. That is the crux of this topic of the today. From your city, from your town, we want to bring that here. We want to embrace that. Thank you, sir.
So Mittelstand is basically the German word for what you would call SMBs, MSMEs, whatever. So it's not the tiny startups, not the large corporates, everything in between. And anywhere in the world, they are the largest driver of employment, of growth, of invention, etc. also. And I didn't know the Japanese word, so it sounds pretty complicated. I need to look that up. But I think wherever you look, especially in manufacturing, they are the engine of growth. Now comes the question, how, like, they all seem to be facing similar challenges around generational change, right? Around going from a single production value function to adding more, moving from the industrial paradigm to the digital and the platform. And that's we discussed with Ashwini-ji yesterday. I think there was a trade fair that was started, and that's so that's technology agnostic. That's essentially a platform paradigm play, right? So everyone might be a manufacturer here, but a trade fair allows everyone to, through interactions internally, but also with people who come here, to create disproportionate value outside of what you're just producing. So you are no longer constraining the value that Ambala produces to the sum of the individual businesses. By doing something like a trade fair or anything that allows interactions, you're opening up the capabilities of Ambala to a larger potential that is not just the sum of the parts, because there are these synergies being created. And so I think something like that is important, needs to be nurtured, needs to be built, systematized, etc. And the generation transfer, I think that's the most exciting thing to watch and to try to drive, because otherwise so much value that was created will just, you know, disappear, and that's sad.
I would like to say thank you very much for giving us a very good talk. It was very informative. This is the second interaction we are having on artificial intelligence. Earlier in the seminar, we got to learn about the use of ChatGPT. As we talked about those tender documents, getting the summary of that, we learned. Today you spoke very well, giving a nice example of microscopy. So that is of interest to everybody. Then Ashwini-ji brought his daughter and you defined 2 roles to them. That is also very nice. So I will like you to explain something for the benefit of Ambala industry. We are small units, we are MSME units, we are using ChatGPT to some extent. Now in some simple way which everybody would understand, how we can use artificial intelligence, whether for quality control or for manufacturing, for marketing, import, data collection. If you will tell in your own words, it will be useful. Today you gave the example of Tarun Mehta, advocate. So if I go to him, after discussing my problem in ChatGPT, I'll be in a better position. And when I put my papers, he will also be in a better position to advise me. So I would like you to give some brief ideas for use of the industry. Thank you.
अगर कुछ सोच के जवाब देना है तो
No, but aसल में what the gentleman there said about how he uses it is really that, you know, that's the core capability, and you can stretch it and you can try out, but that's about it. I don't see anything beyond that really, unless you define. So if you look at your business as a system, what I will not do is to say, ये document upload कर लो आप कल और ये हो जाएगा. Like that's neither that's not something I'm interested in, and I don't think that's something that really compounds value. What I'm more interested in is what can you do, you know, that allows you to compound value over time. So not this, what they call quick wins, you know, I'm not into that type of stuff because everyone else is doing it. I don't need to add to that. So the deeper question here is, what are the capabilities and how should I think about the capabilities of specifically this technology? But, you know, if you take a step back of any new technology that is, you know, that is not part of the existing setup, of the existing paradigm. And a good way to think about it is, and for this I use a historical example in my flagship keynote, which is in what happens in the 16th century. So I think it's around 1543. So Japan is an island, right? So it's like almost like a lab environment to study something. So Japan is in brutal civil war. there's a whole load of warlords fighting with each other for control and dominance of the Japanese island. And that's the peak of samurai warfare, right? That's where the legend of the samurai is born, because they're just constantly killing each other for for decades. And in 1543, there is a storm, and a Chinese trading ship gets shipwrecked just south of the main Japanese island in Tanegashima. And no one would really care, but it so happens that there were a few Portuguese traders on board, and they had 2 front-loading matchlock arquebuses. So basically, the gun ka pardada, jo bhi us samay gun ki tarah hota tha. And in that samurai warfare paradigm, if you look at the gun, right, and you say, what are people using to fire projectiles today? किस चीज़ से शूट कर रहे हैं? तो लोग बो एंड एरो यूज़ कर रहे थे. सैमुराई बो जो है बहुत मुश्किल से बनता है, बहुत महंगा है बनाने में, बहुत स्किल की ज़रूरत है उसे चलाने में. तो अगर आप बो से लड़ाई कर रहे हैं तो गन का रीलोड टाइम उस समय इतना लंबा था, 20 से 30 सेकंड था, और आप तीर तो एक चला के 1-2 सेकंड में दूसरी चला सकते हो. तो लड़ाई में अगर आप अपने सामुराई को गन पकड़ा दो तो बुरी तरह मारे जाओगे, क्योंकि जो सारा लड़ने का तरीका है, जो सारा पैराडाइम है, वो क्लोज क्वार्टर कॉम्बैट के लिए बना है. हेवीली आर्म्ड सोल्जर्स, हाईली ट्रेंड क्लोज क्वार्टर कॉम्बैट में. तो उसमें आप कोई नई चीज़, चाहे अपने आप में बहुत मज़ेदार टेक्नोलॉजी नहीं हो, पर उसमें आप अगर घुसाओगे तो आप मारे जाओगे. और बहुत हुआ इसका मतलब, जो इनिशियल अडॉप्शन, जो लेट्स यूज़ टेक्नोलॉजी, लेट्स अडॉप्ट इट, जो वेंडर कहेगा आपको कि आप हमारा सब्सक्रिप्शन खरीद लो बस फिर सब चंगा है, तो दैट डजंट वर्क ऑब्वियसली. तो एंड ऑन द battlefield is the best place to see it. So obviously business is not war, but it is a competitive setting, so there are parallels, just like there are parallels with sports. So what happens then is that there is one warlord specifically who is a bit of a maverick, and what he does is he says, let me look at, and I don't think he theorized or wrote this down, but seeing what he did makes me think that that's how he approached it. So he said, let's look at what the capabilities of the gun are, independent of how samurai fight today. And if you look at the gun independently of the bow and samurai warfare, you realize that the gun has slow reloading, right? But the gun is armor piercing with a greater range, and you can scale firepower, meaning your samurai archer, even though they are more accurate, even though they can fire more frequently, and even though they are more robust to rain, for example, because gunpowder would get wet, etc., so the gun wouldn't work in rain. So the samurai archer has all these benefits, but after half an hour of shooting arrows, their muscles will cramp. You can keep firing guns all day, and you can, and so the sea change in how you look at a new technological anomaly with an existing paradigm is to ask yourself the question, what can this new technology do independent of what we're doing today? Because if you try to fit it, squeeze it into what you already have, you are constraining the capabilities of this. So you ask yourself, what can this do? What is it strong at, right? What are its superpowers? Once you think of that, then you take a step back and you have to now look at the system. That's why this whole first principle system thinking approach, because when you understand the new strengths of the anomaly independent of your existing business, then you can take a step back and say, okay, now how do I leverage these strengths? What do I have to change in what I'm doing? And how do I cover for the blind spots? So what happens with the gun? So Oda Nobunaga is this ambitious warlord, and what he basically ends up doing is saying, my samurai are heavily armed, so capex, I have to buy the weapons, they're difficult to make, works of craftsmanship. They need years of training, so you cannot just get up, if you give me a samurai sword, I'll be cut in two because I'm not trained on it. You have to train for years. So, and they fight close quarter. The gun is armor piercing, allows me to scale firepower, and so what you do then is, so the most important thing is you can mass produce guns easily. So it has standardized components. A samurai sword or a bow takes, you can see the videos online, it's really work of craftsmanship. Now the gun you can mass produce, and so interestingly, in the 16th century, the Japanese are mass producing guns. Europe isn't doing that, the Chinese aren't doing that, no one in the world is doing that. The Japanese broke open this Portuguese guns that they got and started mass producing them. So the first thing is the strength of the gun was that it could be mass produced, unlike the bow or the arrow, the bow or the sword. So then they mass produced the gun. The second thing is it has very low training costs, right? So the samurais have to be trained over years. They have to start very young. जैसे यहाँ शास्त्रीय संगीत में आप 10 साल की उम्र पे शुरू करते हो, आप 50 साल की उम्र में उस्ताद नहीं बन सकते, because it just takes time. And so with the gun, you can take now a farmer off season or जब भी jung छिड़क जाए, and you teach them, they can learn in a day how to operate a gun. It's not that complicated. You fire, you put gunpowder, you reload, and then you shoot. That's it. It just takes time. And so what Oda Nobunaga does is he has his standing army of samurai. He does not give them guns, right? What he does is he arms his peasants. So now he more than doubles his army overnight without increasing his cost significantly. And the question is, how does he integrate, how does he take the concentrated firepower of the gun, and how does he operationalize it on the battlefield? So the big problem with the gun is reload times. So you need to protect your gunners while they're firing. So he builds palisades. So वो लकड़ी के fence बना देते हैं. So if cavalry is charging, the gunners are protected. So the first thing is you completely break this idea of hand-to-hand combat, because you don't want anyone armed to get close to your gunners. They will get cut in pieces. So you build protective structures on the battlefield, which is a complete change in how you fight at that time. Like the other side would have thought, what are they doing, But the moment the cavalry waves would come, these guys were well protected. He put multiple rows of gunners. So while one is shooting, the other guys are reloading. So the big problem of the gun was reload times. So you solve that by layering it. And then you embed archers also for precision kills, if people come close. And then you built a killing machine. And the big change also was, once he figured out it can be mass produced, at Nagashino he deploys 3,000, around 3,000 guns according to historical records. 3,000 guns. And then, a few decades later, at Sekigahara, which was like the last battle, there were something like 30 to 50,000 guns deployed there, which by historical estimates is half the guns in the world in Japan, in tiny Japan. And so this is a nice historical analogy to think about when there is a new technology and I have an existing paradigm, how do I bring them together in a way that I can win in a competitive setting? And I think the most important thing, like I said, is if we now distill this long story that I said in 3 points, is focus on the strengths of the new technology independent of your business and what you're doing. Every consultant will tell you, show me your process, I will find a way to squeeze it in so I can send you my invoice. But you don't care about that. You care about, for yourself, understanding what the new tech tool can do. Then you ask yourself the question, how do I scale this strength, right? What do I already have that I can use to scale this strength? So you scale this strength, and then you realize, of course, this is not perfect. It has blind spots. And so now you find ways, using what you already have, to plug those blind spots. So very long-winded, very convoluted answer, but I cannot make it simpler. I think complex things need answers.
Simple answer is कि ये तो हमें ही अपने बिजनेस में ढूंढना पड़ेगा कि क्या हमारी स्ट्रेंथ है और उसमें किस तरह से हम आगे कर सकें ये टेक्नोलॉजीज. तेजेंद्र बजाज जी भी चाह रहे थे, पर अब समय बहुत हो गया, भूख लगी है सबको. अभी रितवान कहीं जा नहीं रहे, तो इसलिए डिनर टाइम पे कोई और सवाल जिसके हों वो पूछ सकते हैं. सो आई हैंड द माइक बैक टू सुप्रज्ञा.
Thank you for the insightful session. Round of applause for our speaker. I would like to call Shri SK. I would like to call Shri Sudhir ji, DEO Ambala, for presenting memento to Mr. Rahul Dhawan. Rahul ji. I would request presence of Dr. Vijay Bansal ji, Rotary Hospital, to kindly present the memento to Gautam Arora ji. I would like to call Shri Nalini Kanji to hand over the memento to Mr. Ritwan. For the new member induction, I would like to call, we have a new member, Simplex Engineering. So I would request Shri SK Vadavanji to please hand over the certificate. Also, Saraswati Glassworks से कोई है? Also, I would like to take a moment to announce about the youth wing of HCCI. हम लोग जो second generation है, usually हम लोग सब बाहर पढ़े हुए हैं. We have joined the businesses, but हम लोग सब अम्बाला से बाहर पढ़े हुए हैं. हमने अपनी trainings बाहर करी है और सबकी अपनी अपनी skills हैं. तो ये एक इनिशिएटिव स्टार्ट किया है HCCI यूथ विंग, वेयर हमारे पास अपॉर्चुनिटी है टू गेट टू फेमिलराइज विद ईच अदर, इंट्रोड्यूस ईच अदर एंड आल्सो नेटवर्क. एंड सो इसकी फर्स्ट मीटिंग हुई, वी हैड अबाउट 15-20 मेंबर्स ज्वाइनिंग. वी हैव 30 मेंबर्स who've taken the membership, and I would also request, since जितने भी legacy business owners हैं यहाँ पे, we have a form which the next generation can fill in, join us. The meetings are held every third Wednesday, and we discuss about issues. In the next meeting we have scheduled an issue of hiring. हमारे यहाँ पे hiring की बहुत problem आती है, retention की बहुत problem आती है. तो next जो third Wednesday of next month we are meeting on this issue. So I would request participation of everyone on this. And now I would like to thank everyone. I would also like to call Shri Gaurav Gandhi ji for vote of thanks.
गुड इवनिंग एवरीवन. सबसे पहले तो मैं थैंक्स करना चाहूँगा येस बैंक को फॉर स्पॉन्सरिंग द इवेंट. येस बैंक के अंदर से राहुल सर ने सबसे पहले गूगल में मतलब AI पे सर्च किया कि अम्बाला में अपनी कस्टमर इंडेक्स कैसे बढ़ाया जाए. तो उन्होंने आया आशावन जी से कांटेक्ट कीजिए, चैम्बर को स्पॉन्सर कीजिए, आपके कस्टमर बेस बढ़ जाएगा। एंड आई एश्योर यू सर कि आप चैम्बर को स्पॉन्सर करते रहिए, आपका कस्टमर बेस बढ़ता रहेगा। एंड वी लुक फॉरवर्ड फ्रॉम फर्दर मच मोर स्पॉन्सरशिप फ्रॉम योर ऑफिस सर। थैंक यू सर। सेकेंडली मैं थैंक्स करना चाहूँगा हरियाणा चैम्बर के चेयरमैन आशावन जी का, जिन्होंने इस प्रोग्राम को कंसीव किया, इतने ब्यूटीफुली प्रेजेंट किया और हम सबको गाइड किया। थैंक यू सर आशावंत भैया, थैंक यू सो मच। नाउ कमिंग लास्ट बट नॉट लीस्ट, द स्पीकर ऑफ द डे, रितवान। रितवान का मतलब होता है कि पर्सन हु गिव्स यू ब्लेसिंग्स, हु गिव्स यू लव। एंड आई एश्योर यू कि रितवान, आपने हमें ब्लेसिंग्स या लेसन्स जो दिए वो तो ठीक है, पर अंबाला से आपको बहुत सारी ब्लेसिंग्स और बहुत सारा प्यार मिला है और मिलता रहेगा। वी आर थैंकफुल टू यू फॉर सच अ स्मार्ट एंड सच अ नॉलेजेबल talk, and we love you and we want you to come more often to Ambala and keep guiding us. Thank you so much.
I am sure हम लोग सब डिनर की वेट कर रहे हैं, तो डिनर इज रेडी. Everybody is requested to proceed. Thank you.